Hi everyone, this is Mike, and welcome to part 2 of my Xbox 360 disc collection for 2016. Let's get right back into it, shall we? Next up we have Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 3. So, some of you might be asking, where's Dead Space 2? I have it on PS3. You'll see that in my PS3 disc collection in the future. So, Dead Space 1 is absolutely terrifying. I know you've heard it all before. It's amazing how it's a combat-based game where you have these powerful weapons, yet you still feel, weakened. You still feel vulnerable. And it's because the enemies are so flippin' terrifying, and the atmosphere is unrelenting. My only complaint so far is the zero-gravity sections. They can be, if you mess up on the zero Gs, you can find yourself in a very frustrating place where you'll have to restart. As for Dead Space 3, it's not as scary, but there's still some horror. It's still a scary game, but it's not as atmospheric as the previous games. Instead, it builds more on the lore. But I'll be honest, I only got it because my friend wanted to play co-op with me, and that is worth doing. If you have a friend you want to play co-op with, it's worth playing for that. But unless you're really into the lore, I wouldn't get it if you're playing by yourself, unless you're really into the lore. So there you go, Dead Space 1 and Dead Space 3. Stay tuned for my thoughts on Dead Space 2 in my PS3 Dead Space games collection. Next up is Fallout 3. Now this game disappointed me, not because it was bad, but because it was too hard. Because I expected Fallout 3 to be as easy as The Elder Scrolls. It's not. Because there's a survival aspect, survival mechanic to the gameplay that The Elder Scrolls doesn't have, because of the setting that this world takes place in. You're always having to scavenge and look around, and in this game you also have weapons degradation. So yeah, always having to scavenge and look around can make this very daunting for people like me and people who aren't very intelligent. But for smart players, it can be rewarding, and it does add to the overall experience that this game is going for. The world and the atmosphere is incredible, and it's fascinating. I really want to go exploring it, but I can't because I'm always underpowered because I'm always having to scavenge around and look for stuff. So, Fallout 3, great game, but too hard for me. Next up is Far Cry 3. Now, the story for this is incredibly dark. It reminded me of those really dark action movies that I used to watch in the 90s when they were on HBO. This has that feel to it. If this were a movie that I saw in the 90s, it would be one of my faves because of the darkness of the story. And Voss is, honestly, he's deserving enough to be an iconic character. I honestly think he should be the icon for the Far Cry series. I'm not saying he should be in every game, but if you have a picture of a character in Far Cry, it should be Voss. You know, when you're talking about Far Cry and you want to send a picture, Voss should be the guy. He's that memorable. So get this if you really like dark storylines, which I do. And speaking of dark storylines, here's another one that came out the same year and had a really dark storyline, Spec Ops: The Line. Spec Ops: The Line is what I consider the closest thing to an anti-war military game. An anti-war game. Because this game punishes you for simply playing it. I don't want to say too much, but if you are into... if you liked Apocalypse Now, especially the ending, or if you're a fan of the source material for this and Apocalypse Now, Heart of Darkness, you should pick this up. Especially if you're into games that have something to say. Or dark games in general. Multiplayer's tacked on. I wouldn't bother with multiplayer, but the single player story is fantastic. Gameplay is a bit generic, but storyline is phenomenal. Okay, let me see if I can get this in here. Next up, we have one of my favorite franchises this generation, and that is the BioShock series. And Bioshock 1 is my favorite. I think Infinite is my second favorite, and Bioshock 2 is my least favorite. The only story-driven Bioshock experience that I have not been able to play yet is Minerva's Den. The worlds in Bioshock are incredible. They're disturbing and beautiful at the same time. And they deal with some really heavy themes, and it gets really political at times as well, especially the Ken Levine games, which are my favorite. Bioshock, the first two Bioshocks have a horror aspect to it, but the third one kind of trades it in for a different feel. But this is honestly one of my top franchises of generation. And I always go back, especially the first game. I have played through the first game so much because I love it that much, and I'm really looking forward to the collection. I'm not a fan of remasters, but this is a game I don't mind buying again for the new system, for the current gen hardware, because it gives me an excuse to play through them again. So yes, Bioshock, a must own. You have no excuse. You must play this. And it's also super easy, by the way. It's one of the easiest games I've ever played. And I love that. Next up, well, if I can get these in here, is my favorite, speaking of favorite franchises, this is my favorite franchise of this entire console generation. This might not be as easy as the Bioshock games, although the games do get easier as they go on, and they're pretty easy for the most part, but they do get easier as the series goes on. This game has, in my opinion, some of the best character development in games today, or at least one of the best character development in games. You know how Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, they have these memorable characters that you can attach to, and you connect with, and you remember, and you fall in love with, and you think of them like family? That's what Mass Effect does in game form. And that's honestly, I think, my favorite part. I think the reason why this is my favorite game of the franchise of the 7th gen is because of the characters. Yes, the worlds are awesome, the lore is fascinating, but it's honestly, I think, the characters and the relationships that you build with them that really put this into number one, in my opinion. At least when it comes to 7th gen. And they're thinking of remastering this. I don't know if I'll play this again, but I probably will want to, because it's Mass Effect. I am, and by the way, put out Andromeda already. I'm looking forward to Andromeda, seeing where they take the series next. Next up, we have Condemned Criminal Origins. Sadly, I don't have the case for it. I like this better than the second one. I didn't really like Bloodshot because I felt the horror started out was much too fast paced in the second game. But here it's much better paced, and also the melee is brutal. The first person melee, the brutality of it really adds to the horror element of this game. So if you love horror games, pick this one up. It's a launch title for the 360. Next up is a Tim Schafer underrated classic, Brutal Legend. Get this if you're into metal and or Tim Schafer. It stars Jack Black, and it's a love letter to metal fans. Which I'm not a metal fan, by the way, but I do like good games. So, and plus Tim Schafer, I think, is a brilliant developer. Anyways, moving on here is Max Payne 3. A little too hard for my taste, but it's understandable considering that why there's no regenerating health, because Max Payne is addicted to painkillers, so it makes sense. I found 1 to be easier than 3, but 3, again, another dark storyline, another type of dark action movie that I would have seen on HBO in the 90s. So 2012 had a lot of this. It had this, Far Cry 3, and Spec Ops: The Line all in the same year, so that was a great year for dark action games. So get this if you're into that. Next up is it's honestly a criminally underrated game. People did not support this, and they should have. It's Bulletstorm. If you're into games like Manhunt or Mortal Kombat, where it's just fun to do creative kills, this is that in first-person shooter form. So if you want a creative shooter with fun kills, this is a must-have. And also, I did not expect the story to be as good as it is. The story doesn't deserve to be as good as it is, but it is a good story. So yeah, shame on you for not supporting Bulletstorm when it came out. Oh, crap. Next up is Dead Rising, and this could have been one of my favorite games if it wasn't for two things. One, the fact that it took forever for us to get to the zombies, and two, the timer. I am so glad. I hear they're getting rid of the timer for the new game, and I'm like, I am so glad for that, because all I wanted to do was run around the mall and kill zombies. That's all I want to do. And yeah, so this was a missed opportunity for me. Next up is one of the funniest games ever, and that is South Park: The Stick of Truth. It's basically a pretty much an episode of South Park, and it mocks the turn-based fantasy RPG, and it not only makes fun of it, but it does it very well too. It's another worthy addition to the genre, as well as a lampoon of the genre So I'm not good at turn-based, so the gameplay mechanics are too hard. But the fun thing about that is if you suck, Eric Cartman will rip you one. He will rip you one. And if you're a fan of Eric Cartman, you will smile ear to ear. You might even get a little bit mad at him, but that's what makes it so awesome. And by the way, some of the mature content is really over the top. I'm surprised this didn't get in an adults only rating. I mean, there's some things in there. I'm not going to spoil it for you if you haven't played it yet. But yeah, this one will make your jaw drop. If you're a South Park fan, you owe it to yourself to play this. Even if you don't play video games, or you don't play turn-based fantasy games. If you love South Park, that should be enough to pick this up. One of those rare instances of a worthy, excellent tie-in game. Okay, let me see if I can... Okay, I can't. I'm going to have to put them back up later. Next up is Bayonetta 1. Heads up, do not get this on PS3. It was, again, ported by a different publisher, or different developer, and they didn't do as good of a job. But this version, the 360 version, is phenomenal. It is beautiful. It is so over the top. Your jaw will drop watching the images. They're super easy to pull off. The only downside is there's not enough. They don't give you enough hints on the puzzles. You know, you kind of have to figure them out or look them up online. But the action is a work of art. Next up is Fable 2. Super easy game. The only reason I didn't really play it through was because I didn't want to play Evil, and they only gave me Evil quests for some reason. I don't know what I did wrong. But the gameplay itself is pretty easy. Also, avoid co-op. Play this by yourself, because otherwise the frame rate will drop. But yes, if you want a super easy RPG with morality choices, it's worth picking up. Almost done here. Next up is Dragon Age Origins. And BioWare is really excellent at storytelling, they're excellent at characters, and they're excellent with world building. They're excellent in so many ways. If you love fantasy RPGs, you owe it to yourself to play this. And finally is Clive Barker's Jericho. I got it really cheap, and it had Clive Barker's name on it, so I figured I'd check it out. I played it for a little bit, and I stopped, and I don't know why. I mean, I didn't struggle with it or anything. I didn't dislike it or anything, but for some reason, I just haven't been drawn to continuing. I should continue trying it out and see if I like it or not. I'll let you know if I ever do. Anyways, that is it for my Xbox 360 game collection. Stay tuned, because next up is going to be my 6th generation games. So stay tuned for my original Xbox and PS2 game collection in the next video. Bye.